Thank you so much for having me, for the organization that was so successful, although many issues arose out for Huaping, who agreed to still make it through this session. It's it's for me a great honor to comment on this book and also to meet you personally, since we've been in touch for over 2 years, I guess now, about those issues, and now I'm here. And I will be commenting mostly on the chapter 6, Race and the Claim to Truth philosophy, Kant and the formation of an exclusionary history of philosophy. Will be rather brief, but first I also wanted to state how significant this book is for me, for the tone of deep and sensitive reconciliatory approach to this issue, for the thorough examination of Kant's sources, and for this really deep and insightful investigation on the secondary literature, also for the forward-looking conclusion that you give at the end. And yeah, it's a big pity that we won't discuss it deep enough, I guess. And last but not least, that this book also is of a great help for a Kant scholar, not only in the future research, but also for the future teaching, that, in my opinion, may bear much more responsibility than the research alone, and how we approach Kant's position in the history of philosophy and its impact significance, both from the side of ideal philosophy, but also from the side of the non-ideal philosophy. I want to start with bringing 2 quotes, but from chapter 4, introduction, because I think it's very much sums up what is the beautiful message that Huaping gives to us, scholars, teachers, educators. And I quote, for Kant, for one, a colorblind Kantianism is unequipped to confront the racial injustices that still beset our societies today. If one wants to appropriate Kant's philosophy for anti-racist purposes, one cannot simply excise raciology from it or assume that by making the Kantian theorizing sufficiently abstract and colorless, it will be better suited to articular demands against racism, which is this great call to look at the Kant's non-ideal philosophy and maybe, although inspired by his ideal philosophy, start to build up bottom-up a sensible and race-oriented, and also we can speak like maybe diversity and minority-oriented non-ideal theory in political philosophy that pertains to Kant's work. For another, and this is yet again I quote, once race concepts have been invented and taken up by meaning makers in a society, they can be used in such a way that is irresponsive to empirical counter-evidence and theoretical interventions. Among other things, they may be used as symbolic anchors for how one orients oneself and relates to others in a world where powers and resources are unequally distributed along racial lines. And here is a little bit of a personal story. As I grew up in Poland, and we rarely saw anyone that didn't look like, didn't look different, or in our opinion different. It's funny how we get to be socialized to racial thinking. I never gave a thought about racism, or color blindness of the Western mainstream philosophy and mainstream thinking. I myself still discover how deeply immersed I have been in this racist structure of the world. And the first thought I had when it comes to racism as a topic of philosophical investigation, or even a topic that would come into my little head, was over 10 years ago when I moved to States and I lived in a poor neighborhood because I was a really poor grad student. But I was going every day on foot to a rich campus, and there were two worlds so far apart on my little walk there within 1.5 miles. And this was kind of like first getting to experience that something is deeply wrong, and then maybe start investigating how come. Yeah. So this work is also very important because the world got very much global, and we cannot expect that our philosophy research or philosophy teaching in some not that small but still not so mainstream little European country will not have an effect or will not affect the world at large in a sense that perpetuates inequalities and prejudices. Then more about the book. What Huaping investigates in chapter 6 is the connection between Kant's race theory and his peculiar philosophical history of philosophy, and also philosophical history of the world. So, as Huaping already mentioned today, we have Historia as the aggregation of facts, of factual knowledge, information about the world, and what Kant wanted to develop in his history of philosophy and history of the world was a Geschichte, which is not Historia, which is something that has, as Kant calls it in the idea to universal history, a Leitfaden, yeah? A guiding thread to take the manifold data of experience and unify it under an idea that would put an order to this very diverse and unorganized data. Yeah? And when it comes to history of the world, we already discussed some of it as the horrifying conclusion of how the world history would develop under Kant's idea. But I want to talk about the history of philosophy. So Kant wants to understand the history of philosophy as the history of reason itself, like kind of a little bit pre-Hegelian, yeah. And he aims at this great ideal and organizing thought of his philosophy of systematic unity of all cognitions, both empirical data, both our reflection on the normative, and all in this systematic unity. And then the entire history of philosophy is to be looked upon as something like the unfolding, yeah, of like right or wrong, but like limited ideas that are brought about into this systematic unity in Kant's philosophy, which he claims there can only be one philosophy. Yeah. What it has as a consequence is that history of philosophy is only Western history. As Huaping mentions, page 288, it was a matter of controversy in the 18th century as to whether philosophy originated in the Orient, Egypt or India, or in Greece. And building also on his organizing idea of the history and the features of mankind, he excluded non-white people from being able to form abstract concepts. And that led to this still very present prejudice that philosophy is Western philosophy. So Kant rejects eclecticism, Kant rejects different sources of inspiration, and builds his system where we have, on different levels of abstraction, transcendental philosophy as the preliminary exercise, then metaphysics of nature and morals, natural sciences, including empirical sciences, and applied practical philosophy, pragmatics. But also, in the realm not only of cognition, but of understanding, we have this teleological, okay, account of history of mankind as a history of reason itself, in which, at the end of this history, the only race that is capable of doing it will finally become moralized. Yeah? And this I wanted to also understand somehow. Yeah? And not, I think, being as charitable with Kant as Huaping is, or as patient, I just cannot think of anything but a hubris that can overcome someone so brilliant and insightful, that brought such a revolutionary and important new insights into the history of metaphysics, yeah, for example, and the normative project or of practical philosophy, that maybe he stayed rather uncritical towards his own fixed, established, even though maybe not in accordance with all the data, how to say, opinions on the empirical parts of philosophy. Yeah? And then I think that it can be shown in this uncritical and rather dogmatic vision of his philosophy as being the culminating point of the Geschichte of one reason, and probably was very similar to Kant's reason, or just the same. Yeah. So Kant's hubris is an example of how not to do philosophy, even according to his own standards. The discussion of those issues, like race, was ongoing and the data was inconclusive. Yeah, and I think what is the most important part of my today's talk is how we bear consequences of this particular approach of Kant in our today's understanding of philosophy. Yeah. So there is the problem of our canon, of how we teach students, of what we teach students, what do they are required to read, how are they educated as philosophy majors. As Huaping writes on page 289, it is fair to say that the exclusion of non-European philosophy from the canon was a decision. So, as Huaping also writes, her goal is to, I quote, convey the need to work for a future when academic philosophers, who may also be educators in changing, diversifying, and even more interconnected world, will study and teach histories of philosophy in a truly cosmopolitan manner. As she writes, nowadays the situation is not much different than 20, 30, 50 years ago. And commenting on some anthologies of primary texts or some handbooks of philosophers that are important to know, like Kant or Descartes. She writes, the situation hasn't improved. And what is more, and this is also my extra addition here, most books that cover non-Western traditions of philosophy on some certain topics or just general, also textbooks, handbooks, are called world philosophy, as opposed to philosophy, which is a term designated to Western philosophy. So it's all standing on its head, right? Now, decolonizing the canon is a must, as we are teaching diverse crowds, and we cannot and must not exclude I don't really know because I didn't do the math, but like the vast majority of world history and world population from the very human exercise, which is philosophizing. Yeah, there are some issues with it. Again, a little personal story. I had like this exceptional chance to teach whatever I like, because I was hired just so that there is someone who's going to teach 4 courses this very semester, because it's so late and we have no one else. Please come, do whatever you like, just don't do Kant, because we already have Kant scholars. So I did what I wanted, a little bit of something easy, a little bit of something challenging. But I didn't have to think, okay, my supervisors are gonna look and judge what I'm teaching, because they really didn't intend to prolong my contract or anything. So I opened a syllabus on virtue ethics, a little bit towards non-Western traditions, and it was a hard work. I don't know how about you, but in my philosophical education, not only in Poland, but also in Germany and in the US, had hardly had any chance to be in touch with non-Western philosophizing and non-Western history of philosophy. So, okay, I have some training, so I did some reading, right? But we are not educating the educators to be able to provide this kind of teaching. There are power relations in academia that actually signify a little bit of a backlash when it comes to some new trends in teaching. There is also the problem of putting the labor of expanding the canon on minorities or women, yeah, because we are not minorities, but still somehow kind of looks like it, right? So that someone who has African background, please go teach on race, or please go teach on African philosophy. Why not do analytical philosophy or logic or whatever, yeah? I wish myself a world where this kind of extra labor is first of all not put on these groups, and second, that the new topics and perspectives are not brought bottom up as, I don't know, one syllabus that I built upon over 15 years of teaching, yeah, definitely, but rather that it's somehow introduced on some institutional level. If someone has to complete a class in practical philosophy, in logic, or in ethics, or in metaphysics, or history of philosophy, let them also be required to get to know something that is a little bit beyond our own Western playground. That's my plea. That's what also Huaping pleas for. Now there's another issue with it. So we are way past Kant in the history of philosophy. If we look at the history of reason, it kind of got critical about itself. We are past postmodern philosophy and critical philosophy, like Rita, Rorty, Frankfurt School, Foucault, and so on. It brought the theory of difference, the plurality of value judgments, the possibility of manifold ways of perception of reality. Those philosophers did some work on showing the dead ends of Western rationalism. Nevertheless, they missed A, to include the diversity of voices, and B, to offer a viable alternative for normative theory building. So it's not just, let's just cut off the reason, but let's find a way to get to know different kinds of reasoning. Now, the last issue that I wanted to address. So no one is really thinking that history of philosophy nowadays is really the history of reason, and let alone one reason. Nevertheless, and I quote Huaping, in making this point, gesturing towards Dodson's vision of a culture of praxis, I am gesturing towards this culture of praxis that can make professional philosophy a more inclusive discipline. One component of this alternative disciplinary culture is the value placed on seeking issues and circumstances pertinent to our living, where one maintains a healthy appreciation for the differing issues that will emerge as pertinent among different populations. From this perspective, every philosophical project will be judged by its contribution to the relevant issues, and no project can claim to be absolutely exceptional, mainstream, or perpetually canonical. There are also some remarks Huaping makes about too much reason, or maybe too much argumentation and being fixated on justification. I think that sharing stories can be also important, that it builds to our power of imagination, that it builds to our ability to put ourselves in the place of another. But I don't know if we really could replace argumentation or giving reasons, which can always rely on manifold sources of value, but seems somehow, or maybe it's just my Western bias, universal to human condition. So in conclusion, I wanted to express the Western hybris born within our a history of philosophy as a discipline, and to shed how it was connected to the colonial structure and racist structure built by Kant. Let's drop the myth of Geschichte, let's decolonize the canon, and diversify the style of philosophizing. To leave with a question, except for maybe some policy makers could learn this or that. Yeah, I wanted to ask how the bottom-up or grassroots thinking about those issues could really have a true impact on academia, and how, except for like seeking for those deep roots of Kant's thinking, also in his racist and in his raciology, we can debunk this myth of Geschichte. Thanks.